Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The ring disappeared. Have you ever wondered if the smallest thing you lose could reveal the biggest truth about your life? Before this story ends, you'll discover why a missing wedding ring changed the way I looked at love, marriage, family, and even my confidence in speaking English. If you've ever felt tired, discouraged, or afraid that one mistake could destroy everything you've built, stay with me. What happened on one quiet morning in America seemed like an ordinary accident, but it slowly became one of the most unforgettable lessons of my life. This is my real story. One ordinary Tuesday morning in the United States began exactly like hundreds of mornings before it. The coffee machine was making its familiar sound. Sunlight was slipping through the kitchen window, and my children were arguing over which cereal tasted better. Everything felt wonderfully normal until I reached for my coffee mug. My heart suddenly stopped for a second. My wedding ring was gone. At first, I smiled. I honestly believed it had to be somewhere nearby. Maybe I had taken it off while washing dishes the night before. Maybe it was sitting beside the bathroom sink. Maybe it had fallen into my jacket pocket. I told myself not to panic because people lose small things every day. But 5 minutes later, that calm feeling disappeared. 10 minutes later, I was checking every room in the house. 20 minutes later, I was searching places that made absolutely no sense. I even opened the refrigerator twice, as if a gold wedding ring had decided it wanted to chill beside the orange juice. Isn't it funny how our brains work when fear quietly takes over? We stop thinking logically and start searching with our emotions instead of our eyes. Psychologists often explain that when anxiety rises, our attention becomes narrower. We notice danger everywhere while missing obvious clues right in front of us. Looking back, that was exactly what happened to me. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about psychology. I was thinking about one question that refused to leave my mind. Was this just bad luck? Or was it a warning? I know that sounds dramatic. I used to laugh whenever people talked about signs from the universe. Yet standing alone in my kitchen, staring at my empty finger, I couldn't stop imagining terrible possibilities. Was something about to happen to my marriage? Had I been too busy with work? Had I forgotten to appreciate my husband? Had life become nothing more than paying bills, driving kids to school, cooking dinner, sleeping, and repeating everything again tomorrow? Living in America has taught me many beautiful lessons. Life here moves quickly. Schedules matter. Calendars are full. Parents spend their days balancing careers, children, family dinners, homework, grocery shopping, and somehow trying to find a little time for each other. Sometimes love doesn't disappear. It simply gets buried underneath responsibilities. That's what frightened me the most. Maybe losing the ring wasn't about the ring at all. Maybe it was reminding me of something I had slowly stopped noticing. My husband walked into the kitchen while I was searching under the dining table for the third time. He looked at me, then at the messy living room, and asked with a gentle smile, "What happened?" I quietly answered, "I lost my wedding ring." I expected panic. I expected disappointment. Instead, he laughed softly and said, "We'll find it." Just 4 simple words. "We'll find it." Somehow those words sounded bigger than the missing ring itself. But I wasn't ready to believe him yet. Deep inside, my imagination was already writing a completely different ending. What if we never found it? What if this ordinary morning became the beginning of something much bigger? What if the ring had disappeared for a reason I couldn't understand yet? That question followed me through every room of the house. And I had no idea that the answer waiting for me would completely change the meaning of love, commitment, and even the simple English words I spoke every single day. Every story has a moment when everything changes. For me, it wasn't the moment I lost the ring. It was the moment I decided I had to discover why losing it felt so much heavier than losing a piece of gold. Searching everywhere. There is something strangely funny about losing an important object. Within an hour, my peaceful American home had turned into what looked like the aftermath of a treasure hunt. Kitchen drawers were left open, couch cushions were piled on the floor, jackets hung inside out. And every family member suddenly became an unofficial detective. My children thought the whole adventure was exciting. They searched with flashlights in the middle of the afternoon as if pirates had hidden secret gold somewhere inside our living room. I wanted to smile, but my mind kept whispering the same uncomfortable question. What if we never found it? My husband remained surprisingly calm. The human brain is fascinating. Scientists often explain that stress doesn't improve memory. It actually makes recalling recent events much harder because anxiety competes for the brain's attention. The harder I tried to remember, the more every day seemed identical. Monday looked like Tuesday. Tuesday looked like Wednesday. Life had become a collection of routines. Wake up early, make breakfast, pack lunches, drive the kids to school, answer emails, buy groceries, cook dinner, repeat. Maybe that was the real mystery. I wasn't only searching for a ring. I was searching through days that had become almost invisible because life moved so fast. Living in the United States has many wonderful advantages, but one thing surprised me after moving here. Time always feels expensive. People schedule coffee with friends 2 weeks in advance. Parents race from soccer practice to music lessons. Families carefully organize weekends because weekdays disappear in the blink of an eye. Efficiency becomes a habit, but sometimes efficiency quietly steals attention from the present moment. As I searched beneath the washing machine, I suddenly remembered taking off my ring while baking homemade bread with my daughter 2 evenings earlier. My heart jumped. We hurried into the kitchen and opened every cabinet again. Flour containers, mixing bowls, measuring cups. Even the bag of chocolate chips became a suspect. Nothing. Then my son walked into the room, holding a small toy dinosaur. Maybe he ate it, he said with complete confidence. Everyone laughed. For the first time that day, so did I. Fear had been controlling the atmosphere inside our home, and one innocent joke instantly changed everything. Isn't that what families often do? They remind us that life continues, even while we're worrying about something important. After lunch, I searched the backyard. Every flower bed looked suspicious. I checked under the porch, inside gardening gloves, and even around the mailbox. Our friendly neighbor noticed me crawling through the grass and jokingly asked if I had lost a winning lottery ticket. I smiled and answered, something even more valuable. She nodded with understanding because almost everyone has experienced losing something connected to a special memory. The object itself isn't always priceless. The meaning behind it is. As the afternoon became quieter, another thought entered my mind. Why had I become so emotionally attached to one small piece of gold? The ring represented promises, shared struggles, laughter, forgiveness, birthdays, family vacations, sleepless nights with newborn babies. And every ordinary day that slowly built an extraordinary marriage. Researchers studying emotional attachment often explain that our brains connect meaningful objects with powerful memories. Losing the object can briefly feel like losing part of the story itself, even when the memories remain completely safe. That realization made me stop searching for just a moment. I looked around my home. Family photos covered the hallway. Children's drawings decorated the refrigerator. My husband's coffee cup still sat beside mine on the kitchen counter. Maybe love had never disappeared. Maybe only the ring had. Yet another mystery still refused to leave me alone. If the ring wasn't outside, wasn't in the kitchen, wasn't in the laundry room, and wasn't anywhere inside the house, then where could it possibly be? Little did I know that the answer was quietly waiting in a place I had already searched more than once, proving that sometimes life hides its greatest lessons exactly where we stop paying attention. Memories behind the ring. Funny enough, I stopped looking for the ring not because I had given up, but because I realized I was no longer chasing a piece of jewelry. I was chasing a memory. Isn't it amazing how one tiny circle of gold can suddenly hold an entire lifetime? I sat quietly at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The house was finally silent. The children had gone outside to play. My husband had returned to work, and for the first time all day, there was nothing left to distract me from my own thoughts. I slowly looked at the pale mark on my finger where my wedding ring had rested for years. It felt strangely empty, almost as if part of my identity had quietly disappeared with it. Then my mind traveled backward, not by days or months, but by years. I remembered the morning of our wedding as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. The weather wasn't perfect. The flowers weren't expensive. The ceremony wasn't glamorous enough to appear in a magazine. But none of that mattered. What I remember most is the look in my husband's eyes when he gently placed the ring on my finger. There was no promise of a perfect life. There was only a promise that we would face an imperfect life together. Looking back now, I think that's why marriages survive. Not because two people never struggle, but because they decide the struggle is worth sharing. When people imagine life in America, they often picture beautiful houses, successful careers, and endless opportunities. Those things certainly exist, but real family life looks much simpler than many people expect. Most mornings begin with alarms ringing too early, children searching for missing shoes, parents rushing to beat traffic, and someone always forgetting to pack a lunch. Romance doesn't disappear after marriage. It simply changes its clothes. Sometimes love looks less like candlelight dinners and more like someone warming up your car before work on a freezing winter morning. Sometimes it sounds like, drive safely, instead of, I love you. Living here taught me that love often hides inside ordinary routines. Perhaps that's why losing my wedding ring frightened me so deeply. It wasn't replacing the love. It was reminding me of all the invisible moments that had quietly built our relationship over the years. Psychological researchers often explain that meaningful objects become emotional anchors. They trigger memories because our brains connect physical items with experiences, emotions, and relationships. That's why an old photograph can bring tears to your eyes within seconds. That's why the smell of homemade cookies can instantly remind you of childhood. And that's why one missing wedding ring suddenly opened the door to hundreds of forgotten memories. I remembered our first apartment with furniture that didn't match. I remembered eating cheap takeout on the floor because we couldn't afford a dining table yet. I remembered laughing when our washing machine flooded the laundry room during our first winter together. I remembered holding our first baby in the hospital, both of us terrified because neither of us had any idea what we were doing. Those memories weren't expensive. They weren't dramatic enough to become Hollywood movies. Yet somehow they became the strongest foundation of our marriage. Then another memory surprised me. Years ago, I once asked my grandmother why she never removed her wedding ring, even while gardening or baking bread. She smiled and answered, "The ring reminds me of my promise, but the promise is never inside the ring." At the time, I thought it sounded poetic. Now those words suddenly felt incredibly real. What if I never found my ring? Would my marriage become weaker? Of course not. Would my husband love me less? Absolutely not. So, why was I allowing one missing object to control my emotions? The answer was uncomfortable. Sometimes fear tells stories that facts never support. I had begun asking, what terrible thing is about to happen? Those are two very different questions. Did you find it? He asked hopefully. I quietly shook my head. Not yet, I answered. But I think I found something else. He looked slightly confused before smiling back. Neither of us realized that the greatest surprise was still waiting for us, hidden somewhere inside our home. Patiently proving that sometimes the things we believe are lost forever are actually much closer than we ever dare to imagine. Fear and overthinking. Have you ever noticed that fear rarely knocks on the front door? It quietly slips through a tiny crack in your mind, finds one unanswered question, and somehow turns it into a disaster before breakfast. That was exactly what happened to me on the second day, without my wedding ring. The ring was still missing, but something even more dangerous had appeared. My imagination. It woke up before I did. While making coffee, I looked again at my empty finger, and my brain immediately began creating stories that had absolutely no evidence behind them. Maybe this was a bad sign. Maybe our marriage had slowly changed without me noticing. Maybe I had been working too much. Maybe we talked about grocery lists more often than dreams. Isn't it strange how quickly the human mind connects unrelated events? One missing object suddenly became proof of problems that didn't actually exist. Later I learned that psychologists call this pattern catastrophizing. It happens when the brain automatically predicts the worst possible outcome from a small uncertainty. Our ancestors survived because they constantly searched for danger. Unfortunately, that same survival system still operates today. Even when the biggest threat is simply losing a wedding ring somewhere inside the house. The brain doesn't always ask, what is most likely? It often asks, what is the worst thing that could happen? Once that question appears, logic quietly leaves the room. I tried distracting myself by driving to the grocery store. The parking lot was busy, families pushed shopping carts, children laughed near the entrance, and everything looked perfectly normal. Yet inside my head, an invisible conversation refused to stop. I watched an elderly couple walking hand in hand toward the store. Neither seemed in a hurry. They smiled without saying much. Suddenly, I wondered how many difficult seasons they had survived together. 30 years? 40? Maybe 50? I realized something beautiful. Long marriages are rarely built on grand romantic moments. They survive because thousands of ordinary days quietly accumulate into something extraordinary. Living in America has shown me countless examples of that. Neighbors helping each other after heavy snowstorms. Parents cheering at Little League baseball games every Saturday morning. Couples sitting together on front porches after dinner, without speaking much at all. Love here often looks surprisingly simple. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up every single day. Yet my anxious brain refused to appreciate those observations. Instead, it kept asking impossible questions. What if losing the ring meant I was taking my family for granted? What if I had forgotten to appreciate the little moments? What if the warning wasn't supernatural at all, but emotional? Those thoughts followed me home. That evening, while preparing dinner, I accidentally dropped a spoon onto the kitchen floor. The loud sound startled me far more than it should have. My daughter looked at me and asked softly, "Mom, are you okay?" Children notice more than adults realize. I smiled and answered, "I'm just thinking too much." She nodded seriously before saying something I will never forget. "Maybe the ring isn't lost. Maybe it's hiding until you're done worrying." I laughed because it sounded exactly like something only a child could believe. Yet somehow those innocent words reached deeper than all the logical explanations I had given myself. Worry changes the way we see the world. Scientists explain that prolonged stress narrows attention and makes us overlook obvious information right in front of us. We become so focused on what we've lost that we stop seeing what we still have. My husband, my children, our home, our health, our memories. None of those had disappeared. Only the ring had. After dinner, my husband quietly placed 2 mugs of hot tea on the porch. We sat together watching the summer sunset paint the American sky with shades of orange and pink. Finally, he broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "If we never find the ring, would you love me any less?" The question caught me completely off guard. "Of course not," I answered immediately. He smiled gently. "Then maybe we've been searching for the wrong thing." His words settled into my heart like seeds waiting for rain. For the first time since the ring disappeared, I wondered if this journey had never been about finding gold. Maybe it was about rediscovering everything the gold represented. But just when I believed I had finally found peace, something unexpected happened the very next morning. A tiny clue appeared in the last place any of us expected, and it would send our entire family in a completely different direction. My husband's calm response. Sometimes the loudest answer in your life arrives in the quietest voice. I thought finding my wedding ring would require another exhausting search through every corner of the house. I was wrong. What I really needed was one calm conversation with the person who had placed that ring on my finger years ago. The next morning, while sunlight slowly filled our kitchen, I watched my husband making pancakes with the same relaxed smile he always had. It almost annoyed me. How could he stay so calm when I felt like my world had been turned upside down? Finally, I couldn't hold my frustration any longer. "Why aren't you worried?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment, flipped another pancake, and quietly replied, "Because I married you, not the ring." Those 8 simple words landed harder than any dramatic speech could have. For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. My mind had spent 2 full days creating imaginary disasters, while his mind stayed focused on the only thing that truly mattered. Researchers in relationship psychology often explain that couples who survive difficult seasons usually respond differently to stress. One partner becomes emotional, while the other remains steady enough to create emotional balance. Neither reaction is wrong. Together, they help the relationship stay strong. Looking back, I realized that was exactly what was happening in our kitchen. My fear had been running in circles, but his calmness refused to chase it. Instead of arguing with my emotions, he simply gave them space to settle. After breakfast, we decided to take a slow walk around our neighborhood. It was one of those beautiful American mornings when children rode bicycles, neighbors watered colorful flower gardens, and friendly dogs pulled their owners down the sidewalks with endless excitement. We greeted people we knew, exchanged smiles, and for the first time in days, I stopped thinking about the missing ring every 30 seconds. "Can I tell you something?" my husband asked as we crossed a small wooden bridge near the community park. "Of course," I answered. "When we first got married, I thought love meant never making mistakes. Now I think love means never giving up after mistakes." His words stayed with me. Marriage isn't protected by perfect days. It's strengthened by imperfect ones. Every misunderstanding, every challenge, every unexpected problem becomes another opportunity to choose each other again. That choice is far more valuable than any piece of jewelry. We sat on a park bench, watching families enjoy the warm morning. A young father helped his little daughter learn how to ride a bicycle. She fell once, then twice, then laughed before trying again. Nobody called her a failure because she fell. They simply encouraged her to keep moving. Suddenly, I wondered why adults are often much harder on themselves than children. Why had I judged myself so harshly over losing one ring? Why had I convinced myself that one accident somehow reflected the health of my marriage? The human brain has an interesting habit. Behavioral scientists explain that people naturally assign emotional meaning to uncertain situations because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Our minds would rather believe an incorrect explanation than accept having no explanation at all. That's exactly what I had done. Instead of saying, "I don't know where the ring is," I had invented stories about warning signs and hidden messages. My husband gently interrupted my thoughts. "Do you remember our first apartment?" he asked. I laughed immediately. "The one with the broken heater?" "Exactly," he smiled. "We had almost nothing back then. Cheap furniture, old dishes, one tiny television. But we thought we were rich."
He was right.
We felt rich because we measured life differently. We celebrated tiny victories. Cooking dinner together felt like an adventure. Buying our first sofa felt like winning the lottery. Somewhere between raising children, paying bills, and building careers, we had slowly forgotten that happiness rarely arrives through expensive things. It quietly grows inside ordinary moments. Before heading home, my husband stopped near a small coffee shop and looked at me with the same warm smile I remembered from our wedding day. "Let's make a deal," he said. "We'll keep searching for the ring. But even if we never find it, let's promise we never lose what the ring stands for." I nodded without hesitation. That promise somehow felt even more meaningful than the one symbolized by the gold itself. As we walked back toward our house, something caught my eye near the front porch. It was tiny, almost impossible to notice unless the sunlight hit it at exactly the right angle. My heart skipped a beat. Was this finally the clue we had been waiting for, or was life about to surprise us with an even bigger lesson than either of us could imagine? Lessons from daily life. The tiny sparkle near our front porch wasn't my wedding ring. It was only a small silver button that had fallen from one of my son's jackets. For just 1 second, my heart had raced with excitement, only to settle back into quiet disappointment. I almost laughed at myself. Isn't it incredible how hope can return in an instant? That tiny button reminded me that our minds are always searching, not only for missing objects, but for reasons to believe everything will be okay. As I picked it up, my husband smiled and gently said, "Maybe today wasn't about finding the ring. Maybe today was about finding patience." At first, I thought it sounded like one of those inspirational quotes people post online without thinking much about them. But as the day unfolded, I slowly realized he was right. Sometimes life teaches its greatest lessons through delays rather than quick answers. That afternoon looked completely ordinary. I drove our children to soccer practice, stopped at the grocery store, answered a few work emails from my phone, and hurried home to prepare dinner before everyone returned. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet somehow everything felt different. For the first time in days, I wasn't searching under furniture or opening random drawers every 10 minutes. Instead, I began paying attention to moments I normally rush through. I noticed the friendly cashier remembering my name. I noticed an elderly man helping another customer load groceries into her car. I noticed my daughter laughing so hard during dinner that milk almost came out of her nose. Those little moments had always existed. I had simply been too distracted to see them. Living in America has taught me that people often celebrate the biggest milestones, graduations, promotions, weddings, new homes. But real happiness usually grows inside completely ordinary Tuesdays. It hides in school pickups, evening walks, family dinners, and quiet conversations before bedtime. Researchers studying positive psychology have discovered something fascinating. Long-term happiness isn't created by dramatic life-changing events alone. Instead, it is built through repeated small moments of gratitude, connection, and kindness. In other words, our brains become stronger not because life is perfect, but because we notice the good things that quietly happen every day. That idea stayed with me while I folded laundry later that evening. Each shirt reminded me of someone I loved. my husband's favorite blue sweater, my son's baseball jersey covered with tiny grass stains, my daughter's pink hoodie that somehow always smelled like vanilla cookies. These weren't chores anymore. They were evidence of a full life. Then I remembered something my English teacher once told me years ago when I struggled to learn new vocabulary. She smiled and said, "Fluency doesn't arrive in one giant leap. It grows one simple sentence at a time." Back then, I thought she was only talking about language. Now I realized she was describing marriage, family, and happiness too. Strong relationships aren't built through one unforgettable romantic vacation. They grow through thousands of tiny conversations, shared breakfasts, small apologies, unexpected hugs, and quiet acts of kindness that almost nobody else notices. Isn't that exactly how we learn English as well? One word becomes one sentence. One sentence becomes one conversation. One conversation slowly becomes confidence. Maybe life follows the very same pattern. We become stronger one ordinary day at a time. That evening, while helping my daughter finish her homework, she suddenly asked, "Mom, if you find your ring tomorrow, will everything go back to normal?" Her question surprised me because I realized something had already changed. I smiled and answered, "No, I hope it doesn't." She looked confused. "Why?" I gently touched her hand and replied, "Because I don't want to go back to being too busy to notice how beautiful normal really is." She didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. Children often accept wisdom long before they can explain it. After everyone had gone to bed, I quietly walked through the house with all the lights turned off except one small lamp in the hallway. The silence felt peaceful instead of frightening. My empty finger no longer made me panic. Instead, it reminded me that love isn't something you wear. It's something you practice every single day. Just before heading upstairs, I heard a strange metallic sound coming from the laundry room. It was soft, almost impossible to hear, like something small had gently touched the floor. I stopped walking. My heartbeat grew faster. We had searched that room more times than I could count. But what if this time, everything was finally about to change? An unexpected discovery. The tiny metallic sound came again. It was so soft that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I stood completely still in the dark hallway, listening carefully. The washing machine had already finished its cycle hours earlier, and the dryer was silent. Yet somehow, something had made that unmistakable little click against the floor. My heart began beating faster. Could this finally be it? I slowly walked into the laundry room, switched on the light, and looked around without moving anything. I had searched this room countless times over the past few days. Every shelf had been checked. Every laundry basket had been emptied. Every corner had been inspected. If my wedding ring had been here, surely I would have seen it already. But sometimes our eyes only notice what our minds are ready to see. I carefully picked up a basket filled with freshly folded towels. Nothing. I looked behind the detergent bottles. Nothing. Then I noticed one of my husband's jackets hanging on a hook near the door. It wasn't there yesterday. He had worn it earlier that morning before going to work. Almost without thinking, I reached into the pocket. My fingers found only a pair of gloves and a few coins. No ring. I smiled at myself. The old version of me would have felt crushed by another disappointment. Instead, I quietly hung the jacket back where it belonged. Something inside me had changed. I was no longer allowing every small setback to become a catastrophe. Behavioral scientists often explain that resilience grows when we stop expecting immediate success and begin trusting the process itself. That idea suddenly felt incredibly personal. Whether we are learning English, raising children, building a marriage, or chasing a dream, progress rarely arrives in dramatic moments. It usually appears so quietly that we almost miss it. The next morning, our family gathered for breakfast before everyone left for school and work. The conversation had nothing to do with the missing ring. My son talked excitedly about his baseball practice. My daughter proudly showed us a drawing she had made in art class. My husband joked that his pancakes still looked more like maps than circles. We all laughed. Then I realized something surprising. For the first time since losing the ring, our home sounded exactly like home again. The fear had slowly been replaced by laughter. Maybe that was the greatest clue of all. Later that afternoon, I decided to organize a small wooden cabinet near the entrance of our house. It was one of those places where random things mysteriously collected over the years. Old batteries, spare keys, unopened mail, birthday candles. Tiny flashlights, receipts from vacations, and dozens of objects nobody remembered keeping. Every family has one of those drawers or cabinets. Somehow they become little museums of ordinary life. As I sorted everything into neat piles, I found our children's first school photographs, an old movie ticket from our anniversary years ago, and even a handwritten shopping list my husband had made that simply read, milk, eggs, coffee, and don't forget to hug my wife. I laughed out loud. He had written it as a joke, yet somehow he had forgotten the groceries and remembered the hug. That tiny note was worth more than gold. It reminded me once again that love speaks through ordinary actions more often than extraordinary gifts. Just as I finished organizing the last shelf, I noticed something unusual. One of the cabinet legs seemed slightly uneven. Every time I closed the door, it made a faint tapping sound against the wooden floor. Curious, I gently pulled the cabinet forward by just a few inches. A thin layer of dust covered the floor underneath. There were a few old coins, a missing Lego piece my son had searched for months ago, and several tiny buttons. Then I saw something that instantly stole my breath. A small golden reflection flashed beneath the edge of the cabinet as sunlight streamed through the nearby window. My hands froze. I didn't move. I wasn't even sure I wanted to blink. Was my imagination playing another trick on me? I slowly knelt down and reached underneath, but the object was just beyond my fingertips. I grabbed a wooden ruler from the kitchen and gently slid it closer. My heart pounded louder with every tiny movement. The children happened to walk through the front door from school at that exact moment, shouting happily about their day. My husband arrived only a minute later. Everyone gathered around me, wondering why I was sitting on the floor smiling without saying a single word. I looked at the tiny golden object resting only inches away from my hand. After days of searching, worrying, imagining the worst, and learning lessons I never expected, everything had come down to this one impossible moment. I slowly reached forward, held my breath, and wrapped my fingers around the object. But before I opened my hand, one unexpected detail made every one of us completely speechless. More than a piece of gold. When I finally opened my hand, everyone leaned closer. For one breathtaking second, nobody said a word. Then my son whispered, "Mom, that's not your ring." He was right. Resting in my palm was a small gold-colored toy ring from one of my daughter's old dress-up sets. We all stared at it before bursting into laughter. I laughed so hard that tears rolled down my face. After days of searching, worrying, imagining impossible disasters, and convincing myself that life was trying to send me mysterious warnings, I had discovered a plastic princess ring. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. It felt as if life itself had smiled and gently reminded me not to take every frightening thought so seriously. My daughter immediately recognized it and giggled. "I thought I lost that years ago," she said proudly. Suddenly, the entire room felt lighter. Even though it wasn't my wedding ring, something important had been found. We had found our laughter again. Looking back now, I honestly believe that was the moment everything truly changed. The missing wedding ring had slowly stopped being the center of the story. Sometimes the thing we think is breaking our life is actually rebuilding it in a completely different way. Psychologists often describe this as cognitive reframing. It happens when our perspective changes, even though the situation itself hasn't changed yet. The ring was still missing, but I was no longer the same person who had panicked in the kitchen a few mornings earlier. My fear had quietly transformed into curiosity. My frustration had become gratitude. My imagination no longer searched for disasters. It searched for lessons. That evening, after dinner, we decided to take a slow walk around our neighborhood. The summer air felt warm. Children played basketball in nearby driveways, sprinklers watered green front lawns, and families waved from their porches as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. It was one of those peaceful American evenings that people often remember years later without even realizing it at the time. My husband gently reached for my hand as we walked. I looked down at my empty finger for just a second before smiling. It no longer looked empty to me. Somehow it felt full of memories instead. "Do you miss the ring?" he asked quietly. I thought carefully before answering. "Yes," I admitted. "But I don't think I miss it for the reason I believed." He smiled because he already understood. The gold had never been the treasure. The years were. The promises were. The ordinary mornings, the late-night conversations, the laughter around the dinner table, the tears we shared during difficult seasons, the children running ahead of us on the sidewalk, those were the things that carried real value. Everything else was simply a symbol. Scientists studying human happiness often explain something surprising. After major achievements or expensive purchases, our emotions naturally return to normal much faster than we expect. It's called hedonic adaptation. We become accustomed to objects. But meaningful relationships continue creating happiness because they constantly produce new experiences instead of remaining unchanged. In simple words, people matter more than possessions because people continue writing new chapters with us every day. That idea suddenly felt incredibly personal. Perhaps losing my ring had forced me to stop admiring the cover of my marriage and start appreciating the story inside it. Later that night, while organizing old family photographs, I came across our wedding album. There we were, much younger, smiling nervously, holding hands so tightly that it almost looked uncomfortable. I laughed because neither of us had any idea what the future would bring. We didn't know about the sleepless nights with newborn babies, unexpected medical bills, broken appliances, career changes, family vacations, school concerts, birthday parties, or ordinary evenings watching movies on the couch after everyone else had gone to bed. None of those moments appeared in our wedding photographs. Yet those invisible days had become the strongest part of our love story. Before going to bed, I gently closed the photo album and looked one more time at my hand. For the first time since losing the ring, I whispered, "If I never find you, thank you anyway." It sounded like I was speaking to the ring, but deep inside I knew I was thanking something much bigger. I was thanking the unexpected journey that had reminded me what truly lasts. As I turned off the bedroom light, my husband suddenly stopped beside the closet and frowned. "That's strange," he murmured. I looked up. He was staring at something almost hidden beneath the edge of one of my old winter boots, a tiny flash of real gold, catching the moonlight through the bedroom window. This time, it definitely wasn't plastic. The ring returns. The tiny golden reflection beneath my old winter boot didn't disappear when I blinked. It was still there, quietly catching the moonlight as if it had been patiently waiting for exactly this moment. My husband and I looked at each other without saying a word. Neither of us wanted to celebrate too early. After all, Only a few hours before, a little plastic princess ring had fooled our entire family. My heart beat so loudly that I could almost hear it echo inside the room. I slowly knelt beside the closet, carefully moved the heavy boot to one side, and froze. There it was, my real wedding ring. The same gentle curve. The same tiny scratch near the edge from years ago when I accidentally hit it against the kitchen sink. The same warm golden shine I had touched thousands of times without ever truly noticing. For a second, I simply stared at it. Then tears quietly filled my eyes. I wasn't crying because I had found a valuable piece of jewelry. I was crying because the journey had finally come full circle. My husband smiled before I even picked it up. "I told you," he whispered softly. "We'd find it." Those 4 words suddenly carried far more meaning than they had on the first morning. Back then, they sounded hopeful. Now they sounded true. I gently slipped the ring back onto my finger, but something felt different. The ring hadn't changed. I had. It no longer represented security because I finally understood that security had never come from gold. It came from trust, patience, forgiveness, and choosing each other every single day. My daughter ran into the bedroom after hearing us laugh. The moment she saw the ring, she jumped with excitement as if we had discovered hidden pirate treasure. My son proudly announced that he had never stopped believing, even though just yesterday he had suggested checking inside the dog bed one more time. We all laughed together until our stomachs hurt. The house felt brighter than it had all week. It wasn't because of the ring. It was because joy had returned without fear standing beside it. The next morning, I made breakfast with a completely different heart. The coffee tasted richer. The sunlight looked warmer. Even washing dishes felt strangely peaceful. Isn't it amazing how the world itself seems to change when your mind changes first? Positive psychology researchers often explain that gratitude reshapes our attention. Instead of constantly scanning for problems, the brain begins noticing opportunities, kindness, and beauty that were already present all along. Nothing outside had changed overnight. The same kitchen, the same family, the same neighborhood. Yet everything somehow looked new because I was seeing it through grateful eyes instead of anxious ones. While driving the children to school, my daughter looked at my hand and smiled. "Mom, are you going to lose it again?" she asked with a playful grin. I laughed before answering. "Maybe someday." She looked surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "Because people lose things sometimes. That's part of being human." Then I added something I never would have said a week earlier. "But if I do, I hope I never lose what the ring reminds me to protect." She smiled without saying anything else. Children often understand the most important lessons without needing long explanations. Later that afternoon, I shared the story with one of my neighbors while we watched our children playing outside. She listened quietly before telling me she had once lost her grandmother's necklace for almost 6 months. Finding it was wonderful, she admitted, but learning to forgive myself was even better. Her words stayed with me. Maybe every family has one story like this. A lost photograph, a broken watch, a forgotten letter. An object disappears, but along the way, people discover something much more valuable than the object itself. Looking back now, I almost feel grateful that my wedding ring disappeared for those few unforgettable days. Without realizing it, it slowed me down. It made me notice my husband's quiet strength, my children's joyful innocence, the kindness of neighbors, the beauty of ordinary American life, and the invisible threads that hold a family together even when everything seems uncertain. Most importantly, it reminded me that love isn't measured by what stays on your finger. It's measured by what stays inside your heart. As evening settled over our neighborhood once again, I quietly watched the sunset with my husband from the front porch. The ring rested comfortably on my finger, but neither of us mentioned it. We didn't need to. Then he looked at me with a gentle smile and asked one final question. So, do you still think losing the ring was a warning? I smiled back, took a slow breath, and realized the answer wasn't as simple as yes or no. The truth was far more beautiful, and it would become the final lesson that completely changed the meaning of the story. The real warning. So, was losing my wedding ring really a warning? I smiled at my husband before answering because, after everything that had happened, I finally understood the question itself had been wrong from the beginning. The ring was never warning me that my marriage was falling apart. It was quietly reminding me not to let everyday life steal the attention that love deserves. Looking back now, I can honestly say those few days changed me more than finding the ring ever could. Sometimes we spend years searching for life-changing moments, never realizing they arrive disguised as small inconveniences. A missing ring, a delayed flight, a forgotten birthday card, a simple misunderstanding. These ordinary moments have an extraordinary way of slowing us down just long enough to see what we have been overlooking all along. That morning, I stood outside our home with a warm cup of coffee while the neighborhood slowly came to life. School buses rolled through quiet streets. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Children laughed while waiting for their parents to finish tying loose shoelaces. The same peaceful American neighborhood I had walked through hundreds of times suddenly looked completely different. Nothing outside had changed. I had. Isn't that one of life's greatest mysteries? The world often looks brighter the moment gratitude becomes stronger than fear. Scientists who study human attention explain that the brain naturally notices whatever we repeatedly focus on. Spend every day searching for problems, and problems will seem to multiply. Spend every day noticing kindness, progress, and small victories, and your brain gradually builds a more hopeful picture of reality. This doesn't mean pretending life is perfect. It means refusing to let fear become the author of your story. During those days without my wedding ring, fear had written dozens of imaginary chapters that never actually happened. My marriage didn't collapse. My family didn't fall apart. My husband didn't stop loving me. Instead, we laughed together, remembered old memories, slowed down, talked more deeply, and appreciated each other more than we had in months. Ironically, losing the symbol of our marriage strengthened the marriage itself. That realization still amazes me. It also reminds me of learning English. Years ago, I often became frustrated because I couldn't speak fluently. Every mistake felt embarrassing. Every forgotten word seemed like proof that I wasn't improving. Then one teacher gave me advice I still remember today. She said, "Don't measure your English by today's mistakes. Measure it by the fact that you didn't quit." Confidence grows that way. Success grows that way. We rarely become stronger because everything goes according to plan. We become stronger because we keep showing up after life surprises us. If you're listening to this story while practicing your English, maybe you've been thinking about giving up. Maybe you've repeated the same lesson 5 times. Maybe you feel nervous speaking even simple sentences. Maybe you compare yourself to people who sound fluent already. If that's you, I want to tell you something my missing wedding ring taught me. Progress is often invisible while you're living through it. I didn't notice how much my family was teaching me until I stopped rushing. I didn't realize how deeply my husband loved me until I stopped searching for dramatic proof. I didn't appreciate ordinary mornings until I feared losing something precious. Your English journey may feel slow today, but every story you read, every sentence you repeat, every new word you understand is quietly becoming part of your future confidence. One day, you'll suddenly realize you're having conversations that once felt impossible. Just as I suddenly realized my greatest treasure had never been a ring. Before we went to bed that evening, my husband gently held my hand once again. The ring rested comfortably on my finger, but neither of us looked at it. We looked at each other instead. That simple moment said more than words ever could. Love isn't protected by jewelry. It isn't measured by expensive gifts or perfect anniversaries. It grows every time two imperfect people choose patience instead of pride, understanding instead of assumptions, gratitude instead of fear, and hope instead of giving up. So, was losing my wedding ring a warning? Yes, but not the warning I expected. It warned me not to lose sight of the ordinary moments that quietly build an extraordinary life. It reminded me that the most valuable things can never be dropped under a cabinet, forgotten inside a closet, or misplaced during a busy week. Kindness, trust, family, hope. Those treasures only disappear when we stop noticing them. And perhaps that's the real reason this story happened at all. Not so I could find a ring, but so I could find myself again. If this story stayed with you until the very end, I hope you'll carry one simple thought into tomorrow. Don't wait until something precious disappears before discovering how precious it already is. Sometimes the happiest ending isn't finding what you lost. It's finally seeing what has been beside you all along. That's all for today. I'll make many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss them.